just south of Kalamazoo, Southwest Michigan, in Schoolcraft. Here today, we're going to show you the Ultimate Dock System. That is the name of this dock system, the Ultimate Dock. It is available in an anodized aluminum surface. Stays cool to the touch, cooler than wood dock, believe it or not. It's the anodizing and the surface treatment that keeps that nice and cool. Always will have the anodized side rails, but it is available in a composite decking as well for the people that do prefer that style. So it's the same frame, same system, same leg design, everything, just the different treads in the surface. And technically there's 1 inch difference between those two options, but otherwise they're identical. This is a system that is all integrated. It is modular with the legs. We're going to show you here. We're going to build one real quick, put the legs on it, show you how we measure, show you how we adjust, show you some of the features on this system. It's a hybrid between many systems on the market, many of the premium systems. They've done a nice blend that makes it better, in our opinion, than all of them, and generally cheaper than a lot of them as well, because you're not paying for that brand name. So anodized aluminum, again, stays nice and cool. That's our most popular. It's a little bit lighter than the composite. Will stay a little bit cooler, but never get burned on it. Nice and light. It'll always be there. Keep it up out of the water. Keep it out of the ice. Don't tie a pontoon to it directly. You'll do great. You'll love it. It's very stable, very modular. You can keep changing the design with almost no variance in the hardware. Unless you're going around a boat slip, you do need, or a boat lift with a slip or making a turn, you need 1 extra hardware bag, but otherwise it is priced with this hardware bag, comes with it. So that is as part of that section price, unlike traditional dock where it's completely a la carte with a separate support, separate braces, separate feet, everything. The thing you need to add is just the poles at your length, because that's going to vary between every single section typically, or every system. So those are sold a la carte, but you get everything you need to go straight out or do a platform in this configuration. You just need to buy 1 extra bag of sockets and hardware and another pole if you're going to make it a 90-degree turn somewhere. So we'll explain a little bit of that. We're going to show how these sockets actually do go on the dock, how you can change them midway. So it's very modular. If you've got your lake levels flooding up and down, changing a lot, you have more adjustment in these leg sockets than a traditional style dock support that just has a round clamp. You get the stability of an underdock system. You do have the option to cut and cap the poles flush, like an underdock system where you don't see anything above it. Some people prefer that the whole way. This one's going to be mostly that in this particular setup. Some people want certain poles sticking 5 feet above it for a handle, and a lot of people end up with about 12 to 18 inches or 12 to 24 inches showing above the dock. Completely preference. You can cut them and cap them at any time. You can change that. You can keep changing the layouts with essentially the same stuff. Again, just need that extra bag if you're going to do that slip. Otherwise, you can keep changing it without any drilling or permanent modifications. So again, if your water level is fluctuating up and down, you're going to have that extra adjustment by having this socket with the ability to pass the pole through. So you may have a lot of pole. Some of our lakes around here flood up and down 5 feet within a course of a season or so, 5 vertical feet. So they have a massive variance. Whereas on an underdock style or bed muck, you would just run out of adjustment and constantly be changing your poles. This one, you have the option to pop them through it, have it above it, but still have all the structure and benefits of a gusseted underdock style. It's going to be a lot more stable. So it's a hybrid system. The platform is also going to install much easier than doing a separate support, because each section hangs on to the previous with connector clips. They drop right in with a set bolt that pinches that. So when you're leveling the dock, you're leveling one section at a time going out. When you get to that platform, typically you'd have to square up 2 or 3, say 12 or 16 foot supports. Our superior dock, we can do up to a 12-foot wide support, generally without a center leg on our HD beams, but everything after that, generally you would have to go to some different style that you get center legs, and they're that much harder to put in. And whether you put it in or have your crew at your lake install it, as things are getting tight, keeping it easy and nice for them, keeping them happy is going to be great. Keeping your friends happy and still having a better result. So In this case, each section just hangs on the previous. You're only leveling one at a time. You don't have to square up those multiple supports, lift sections over them without trying to knock them in, square it all up, and then level 3 or 4 or 5 sections of platform weight all at once. So this one right next to us in the water, you may be able to see it's a hybrid. We actually have our Superior dock at the neighbor's house here with MaxLock supports that are our most popular. And that one went to a 20-foot wide Ultimate Dock platform, parallel platform. So it's 10 feet long, 20 feet wide, so 5 sections at 4 feet. That is a Sunwalk Ultimate, which is a little unique to have that blend, but it shows you the options to get that nice stable platform, super easy to put in. It's going to be a lot more stable than even the best of a typical crossbar or MaxLock or Superior beams, just inherently with the extra sockets and braces and how they go together. Simpler, and again, at a great price compared to the comparable options on the market for this. So this is your hardware bag. Comes with everything here. You get 2 medium-sized foot pads. They are kind of right between what we call a sand pad or a mud pad. We always would do a mud pad per se, even if you had sandy bottom around the platform on a Superior dock, but you're getting that benefit the whole way through, having that medium. We've done everything up to a 24-foot pole with mud augers and standard augers in these. Yes, 24 feet based on muck and water depth. And those poles on some of those basically disappear in the muck. So this one's quite the opposite. We've got 5-foot poles that are longest here. And again, this customer wants to keep it nice and flush and low. Sometimes people want them high for ropes for temporary tie-up. You don't want to moor a pontoon for the season directly to the dock. We always do a 4-point independent mooring, just so if you get a bad storm, you're not risking flipping your dock or getting damage. It's going to be on those separate augered poles with bungee lines. So anyway, so this is what you get. You get the 2 medium-sized pads. You get the 2 leg sockets. You get 4 small braces that are going to go, basically a diagonal brace that integrates with the leg socket. I'll show you how neat that is compared to most traditional docks where you have a separate crossbar that you have to level the dock, with it off, readjust it, walk on it, see if it sinks at all in the muck, then go back, check your level again, then add that brace. This is going to integrate right into it. It stays on there permanently if you choose, or you can take off the whole assembly all at once, and we'll show you that as well, so that you can stack it nicely again for the winter. Or if you choose, you can leave all this hardware right on the dock, lay them out like a bunch of ramps, or sometimes you can kind of zigzag stack it. Apologize about the wind here, but you can kind of zigzag pile them up depending on the length of your poles. But it's very fast, usually just as fast or faster than a traditional dock with 4 separate dock bolts and messing with all the washers and tightening and leveling and all that. So we'll show you how those pop right out. You have a nice neat stack, or you can leave them, keep them out like a bunch of ramps if you've got the yard space and don't mind looking at them. This system here, we've got 16 sections, so that would be a lot of ramps laying around. So, but it stays adjusted when you do take that socket out properly. You just label them. That way you're not going to be re-leveling from scratch every year. And it's very, very fast, easy install comparison. So then you get those pads, you get 4 caps, plastic caps, in case you do cut them flush. They have these spacers that are stacking spacers for transport. Keep those if you do plan to stack it in the winter. Keep them anyway, just in case. That allows you to get your fingers between the sections. Keeps them safe from grinding on each other or slipping around when you get some snow and ice on it. We would always flip the top side, the top section upside down, have it up on cinder blocks. Right now we just have it on small wood blocks. It's going to get installed right away. But otherwise, you never want to set them in the grass or dirt. Ideally, you want them up on cinder blocks so leaves can blow right under. Flip that top one upside down. We never recommend tarps. It can actually trap more moisture in leaves and do more damage, and you're just going to shred a lot of tarps and waste money. So flip that top one upside down and try to keep the leaves off it for the fall. Don't put it under the old tree. You'll be all set. So again, we've got that. Got connectors, hardware, comes with everything but the poles. So we'll get into it here. We've got some very basic hand tools. We've got our 6-foot level. As we are going out, we always have a master side. We always use a 6-foot. The 4-foot levels are never actually truly 4-foot. This dock is actually 50 inches wide, 50 inches wide on the aluminum surface, 51 on the composite surface, and they are 10'5" long due to that box frame. We still call them a 4x10, but they're actually slightly larger. So you have a little benefit there, especially if you're going a long distance. You're gaining that extra 5 inches to every section, which adds up in this kind of quantity. So right next door, we've got 150 feet out. Everything up to 250 feet is pretty normal in this kind of stuff. We have a lot of docks that are 30 feet of this, and we have everything up to 400 feet in some locations going straight out based on that depth. So for comparison, that's 10 feet longer than we're going to be on this one. On the neighbors there. Again, that one's a blend of Superior dock with MaxLock supports going into an Ultimate platform. This one's all Ultimate anodized. And so, yep, as it's going in, we're just going to always use one master side with the level. We go down one side rail, and as we're leveling that, get that good, then we always level across. If you try to go this way and this length, you'll end up seeing a little bit of a difference. The other way you can cheat without a level on an aluminum dock is you'll actually see a little bit of a glare or a little bit of a shadow between the joints of the dock. So if you've got a couple sections in front of that jet ski lift there, you'll see a slightly different variance in the shading of the dock. So it's a little bit brighter on one side, a little bit darker right past that support. So you can tell if you've got there's always going to be some variance in the actual anodizing color, especially as they weather. They do stay pretty much this dull gray compared to if you've ever been burned on a mill finish dock, aluminum dock, which is raw aluminum, like your parts here. These get hot, they'll discolor with that oxidation. That black that gets on your fingers, that's the oxidation of the aluminum. The anodizing is the surface treatment that blocks that. It's much more resistant to stains. It can still get stained if you have it in the water or have wet leaves on it for a while, but it's going to be far more resistant, stay nice and cool. But yeah, so you can use that little trick when you're going out, just checking the sun on the panels to see if you're close to level, and yeah, go from there. So you can get into this and start building. Set this off to the side. So we got part way ahead on this one. On this particular setup, we're coming off these stone steps, so we'll show you how to measure on those as well. A few tricks coming off to be able to tell several things from those measurements as you're going. You'll be able to see what kind of pull you're going to have above the dock. With each size, you're going to be able to measure your water clearance, which is one of the most important things, and varies depending on your lake and how much it's going to fluctuate. So this lake fluctuates only 3 to 5 inches usually annually. Very controlled. And again, some of our customers are dealing with up to a 5-foot variance in the course of a summer or two. So got this one shallow, sandy here. We've done these up to 24-foot poles with mud augers, the whole shebang. So I've got a 2-footer in here. I've got one socket started to show you how, and I'm going to build this other one here, talk a few things over. So we've got, again, our braces that come in there. We've got our small connector clip to show you. So that's what's going to connect the section to section. Just drops right in, and it's a pinch bolt that secures each piece to itself. This weight, we get asked the weight a lot. I'm going to pick this up on my own just to show you. It's going to vary in this system and many of these that have integrated legs and these premium designs, that it's going to vary based on the length of your pole in there. So we weighed it with a 4-foot pole with all these sockets, the foot pads. It's 140 pounds. So just for comparison, a lot of wooden docks with the aluminum side rails are somewhere around 200 pounds per section of just the section, not counting the support. So we're about 140 all in. So if you had a 10-foot pole in there, it's going to jump just based on that difference in the poles there. So very manageable, much lighter than an aluminum wood dock. If you're full wood in a 4x10 with triple 2x6 joists, you're talking 300 plus on a lot of those. So a lot of people get scared by the numbers. They don't realize what they're capable of lifting or what they've been lifting with an old wooden dock. So in comparison to our Superior dock, where that's 86 pounds a section in a traditional 4x10, where you have the separate support. So again, this is with the support, 4-foot pulls, 140 pounds. I'll pick this one up by myself just to show you. We've got a 2-footer in here. So when you're measuring these out, what we want to do, especially on that first time, and especially if you have muck, add in some more safety factor. It's always better to cut off a little bit of pull after the fact so you don't get any bad surprises, especially if it settles in the muck a little more, or if you're brand new to the lake. There's a lot of ways you can cheat when you're measuring by looking at the neighbor's stuff, especially if it's piled up on the shore, or if you have it that came with the house. Always send a picture of that whenever you're getting a quote, and measure all those pulls that you had. Especially if you have a picture of it when it was in the water from the real estate listing or last summer. We can tell a lot of things based on the height over your water. We'll know if your new poles, if you're replacing everything, if they're going to need to be longer, or if you're at a safe clearance height, or a whole plethora of information that we can get by some pictures and measurements. Even if it's a completely junky old dock, it's better than starting from scratch. But we'll show you how to do that too. So having that pole is always good. It's cheap to cut off a little bit. We don't want to just have you cut them all off for no reason, but always better to have that little bit spare, especially if you're paying an installer. That way they don't have to make any surprise return trips and charge you for that. So, although a lot will charge you to cut them off, but you can easily do that at the end of the season if you're okay with it. For one, you can chop it from the bottom real easy when you get it back on shore for the winter, and that way nothing changes, or you'll find any possible changes, you know, if it does settle in the muck, or if the water level sneaks up on you or something. That way you've always got that. So again, on this, you have the benefit of about a foot of adjustment if you're going to have it capped. Otherwise, it's pretty much infinite of what you can put through the dock system. So this actually goes inside, so you don't have any poles sticking outside the dock. So that opens up some other opportunities where you can actually overlap a joint with another section or a platform, or usually it's a side finger shooting off, or to go around a boat slip. You can actually overlap that joint because you don't have a pole physically poking out 3 or 4 inches past the edge of your dock. These are all ambidextrous where they come, so when you do mount them in, one of your height adjustment bolts down here is going to be facing the length of the dock, and the other one is going to be facing side to side. That way you can put this socket in any corner of the dock based on if you're going to do a platform or to just go straight out. And it's as simple as changing where these connectors are and where these sockets are if you want to vary it up, or if your water level surges up, you don't need to go out 150 feet anymore. Now you only need 100. You can use those extra 5 sections and build yourself a platform as long as your poles are long enough, or vice versa. If you had a platform and you need to rob it because your boat's stuck on your lift right at the end of the season, might not want to buy more dock sections for the last 2 weeks, but that allows you to steal your own platform, basically move it and go further straight out, and then move it back with no permanent changes, just moving these connections. So we've got this in here all set up. Got your hardware bag. Comes with the stainless carriage bolts and brass nuts there, so flange nuts, so they grip in a little bit. Never put stainless on stainless. It'll weld itself together and you'll be in a world of misery and probably ruin your dock trying to cut them off. So never use stainless on stainless. Yes, you could technically use anti-seize, but or a different grade of stainless, but always use dissimilar materials to make sure that never happens. Even if you use just a zinc nut and the nut rust on the stainless carriage bolt, it's not going to stick. So go ahead and come on in here and we'll show you a few options. That's how we build this. We've just got our impact here. 3/4 inch is what the height adjustment is. 9/16 is what all the other socket components are. So very simple. For those 2 sizes, that's basically what you need for essentially everything on these. We've got steps, we've got a bumper over here to show you kayak rack accessories that all go on this track rail system on this box frame. So you're gaining all this extra rigidity by having this box frame and this extra dimple in this extrusion or this track you're gaining the rigidity just by having all those bends in there. So it's going to be a lot more stable in terms of the bounce when you're walking down it versus a traditional F-channel style stringer, which is on most of the aluminum docks. So you're gaining that strength. We've got the 2x4 framework underneath. That's how we call it. So you've got your 2 tubes running the length, 4 side to side. That's what we do on our Superior as well, whereas most competitors start with a 2x2 or a 1x2 even in some cases. Even if it's the same anodized surface, you're getting far less framework and usually fewer welds underneath as well from those fewer cross sections and just missing that. So the devil's in the details when you're pricing things out. It comes down to more of the structure, because quite literally almost all these treads across most suppliers on the anodized aluminum are nearly identical. It's the frame and the system around it that really matters, and the price difference that you'll see out there. So this one's very easy ballpark because you get everything but the poles and kind of average out the poles. So you can figure out, do you have the budget for 16 sections, or is it only 3 sections? You can always add that platform later if it's a budget thing, or if you're starting with a smaller platform, you can infinitely expand. This system can literally go infinite wide, then infinite long, because of how it connects with the integrated supports. So you can literally cover your whole lake, your whole yard. Some people use them as decks. So come on in here and we'll show you some of this and get going on popping this in the water. So we've got our brace tubes here. I've got a 3-foot leg. We're starting with a 2-footer in here. When you do measure, again, if you're going to keep them nice and low and flush, you want to try to keep as much possible reserve pull inside. And when these are sold in 1-foot increments generally, so sometimes you might be on that edge. You can pull through the foot pad. Usually we recommend anywhere from 3 to 5 inches, a little more sometimes if it's softer. It might be a little less if it's nice and rocky. We've got this one a little less because we're quite sandy and rocky up by shore, and just going to start from there. So we'll have this, but again, you can be just a little bit higher and either ramp up or do a little trimming on the first one. It's better to keep as much extra pull in there in case it does sink if you're going to cut it and cap it. Otherwise, you can let it go through the top for now and cut them later, or maybe you'll find that you enjoy it just as it is. Skip all that work. So we're going to put this socket in here, show you how these build. It's super simple. So again, it's going to be ambidextrous depending on which side you're going on. That way you never end up with the wrong corner socket. So we've got these carriage bolts here. You're going to be coming right on in. There's these cheater holes here in the frame, so it's cut out a little bit bigger. You just have to angle that carriage bolt and dip that head right in there. So this one's all set up and done. And have the camera come on in here nice and close, and we'll show you how these pop in. Got my 9/16 and a half inch, or sorry, 9/16 and 3/4 sockets here. So again, here's that little cheater hole. There's our carriage bolt. We're gonna just tip that head, get to fit right in there, and just slide it a little bit down. So you see where our braces come in. So again, at the end of the season, if you want to stack it, you just have these 3 flange nuts holding that whole piece, and the entire thing can come out as one. I'll show you that here temporarily. We're going to have this socket in this corner. It's going to have this L-tab up here. We're looking at where our braces are going to go to depend on which side this extra bolt has to go, this 3rd bolt. So that one's going to drop right in there. I'm going to put one more bolt in the track for our connector. Again, it's this small profile here, and it just drops right in. The next section will fall right in there. You just pinch the sections together, do your height adjustment to level it, done. It's very fast to put these 3 on here if you are going to stack it, and we'll show you that here. So a lot of people think they have to take all these braces apart. That's not at all the case. But welcome to do it. And then we just, if you are going to pull that out, we just suggest at the very top where it's hidden inside there, just label it 1 right, 1 left, or 1L, 1R, 2L, 2R. That way you know going out, it can just pop right in. Make it really simple the next spring. Drop this in. Got a little bit of weld material in there, a little burr material from where that was drilled, so we got that out of the way. Going to drop one more carriage in here. Generally, I line up this little connector tab with the end of this brace just to make it nice and symmetrical and simple. You just don't want this carriage bolt coming too close to that cheater hole, but you got the space right there for it. So it's going to drop on. Just line up that edge, the corner of that triangle, that way you know it's symmetrical without having to measure. Super easy. Gets you a little bit wider grip. Some people put them closer in the middle, but the wider you're going to be, it's going to be a little bit better side to side, holding that together. So just going to finger tight, put that nut on there. Going to show you how this whole socket comes out. So these pieces here just slip through. The bolt can fall out just like that. So one way to make it simple is you can drop that right through your brace on the one end. Because it is a through design, line up that carriage head square, drop that in there, and just spin that on. I'm going to leave these finger tight for now. I'll show you where this is going to end up. That way you've got a little bit of play here to make sure you're not jamming up top and bottom. Quick spin those. Switch back to my 9/16 here. So I'm just going to buzz this tight, nice and centered on there. When you hear that pitch change, the vibration as you're tightening with the impact, that's when they're good. Don't need to over tighten them or kill them. That pitch change means it's plenty tight. So we can buzz that on there. Do this connector, do this one. Even though we're going to pop those right back off in a second, showing you this, how this works. Again, feed that through there. It's nice and quick. Drop that in, line that up, make sure that's nice and centered. Socket in my hand. So that is how that would go. You've got your connectors here. So one last time. At the end of the season, well, let me put the rest of it together here first. We've got our 3/4 inch is what adjusts the height. I'm going to loosen that. Again, it's going down the length on one side, just depending on how it lays out in your particular case, and it's going to be side to side in the others. That way you never end up with wrong corner. So we always have pull caps in there. Start with that end inside. In this case, I don't have any caps on the top of the system. So again, that's how it passes through, which is very unique without being outside the frame. Almost all the other designs of this premium kind of segment that have integrated legs are going to dead end at the dock. So that limits your adjustment, and it just flat out doesn't work for many of those lakes that have massive seasonal flooding, or even normal seasonal flooding can be too much, especially if you get some muck mixed in there. You know, to us, muck can be literally bottomless up to our armpits as far as I've been before. Some people think muck is over their toes. That's just a lake bed. So once we start hitting like shin deep muck or different is when we start kind of adjusting those things. So when you are measuring, just feel it out. How far are you sinking when you're out there versus trying to jam something in, or a piece of bar, a pipe down in. It's most realistic just feeling it out how you're sinking in on your feet, whether it's ankles, shins, knees, waist, chest. That tells us a lot. So we're going to start here. Got that loose in there. Again, these are a through design on this foot pad. We're pretty rocky and sandy up front, so sometimes you just can't sneak it, but that's where you can hide a lot of pull. If you don't want to cut them, And if you're able to push it through, you got a little bit softer ground out there. If you can hide 8 or 10 inches or so, go ahead. Sometimes it can be tough when you are leveling it to try to get that to jam in without kind of changing your angle or having it kind of curl into the ground. It's hard to just drop it vertically and jiggle in. But so yeah, usually we're about 3 to 5 inches. That way you get a little bit of bite, keeps that dock nice and secure in the lake. So it'll help with a little bit of potential shake. Bolting to a seawall or a rock wall is going to do a ton of things for you. It's very difficult, obviously, with the rock wall to actually secure it. But if you have a steel seawall, that's going to be great. Otherwise, we usually use a shore starter kit with a step up. It's a little bit different on this style dock. You have more of a step, so they actually have short sockets that would go in here. They skip the braces, but you're going to end up with about a 10-inch step at kind of the minimum, depending on how you do it. So usually that would be with augered poles right behind the wall in the yard. That way you can change that elevation. You can put a big pole there with lights on it for a handle. Some people actually make handrails down them. You can keep them nice and down low, but that secures it. It's going to keep that angle the same every year. You just leave those augered poles right in your yard, slip the dock and the socket off of it. That way you end up in the same spot. Because when you do go out, especially 100, 200 feet, a few degrees of angle is going to put you in a way different spot out at the end. And yeah, so that keeps it the same. Usually you can move 2 or 3 sections, look at it from the house, put your back to the wall, see if you're square of the house or whatever you want to see based on your angle, because your shoreline is probably not square to where you want to go. And that can have a big difference, and it can look a lot different as you're installing it versus once you get up to the house and think, holy smokes, that is way crooked, even though it might have looked good from down here. So usually you can adjust, 2 or 3, kind of worming it over. After that, you're probably going to be taking it all back apart if you're dissatisfied with where you ended up. So short starter kit or some form of bolting to the wall is going to keep that the same every single year, whether it's you or your installer. That way you don't need to be there when they're doing it. Makes it easier for everybody. Can't screw it up. You can also put a pole out in the very end to aim for. If you can walk out to where you want to end up, you could have somebody watching you from the house, go temporary auger a pole, jam a shovel in, and just keep either an imaginary line going out, or you could even tie a string or a rope if you had one long enough. That way you're following that and try to keep the closest on track as you go. That's a nice trick there. So we're going to put a little bit more through here just to show you the difference. I do have a longer pole on this side, so it's going to actually pop through, but I've got about the same amount here. It's going to be best after you get these measurements. We quote out the poles in those 1-foot increments. If you kind of know roughly where you're going to be based on what you preferred when you tell us, did you want to see 2 feet above the dock? Did you want 5 feet of pole above the dock? That comes down to preference at some point, or if you have the fluctuation, you're just going to have to deal with it, or have to have 2 sets of poles if your lake is flooding 3 or 5 feet in a course of several seasons. So sometimes you just can't choose, and it looks a little goofy when it is low, but it is what it is. Otherwise, it's up to your preference. As long as we have a safe height over water, at the absolute minimum, you want to be at least 12 inches over the water. So that's to the bottom of the dock. And we'll show you how to measure that in a little bit. Plus, you'll be able to see, the surface height of the dock and how much pole is going to be above it and what the closest pole length is going to be for that. So you can get numerous measurements in one. That way we're all on the same page, because a 3-foot or a 2-foot or a 5-foot or sometimes even a 10-foot pole might work in this case if it was sticking, 7 feet above it. So that helps all be on the same page and really visualize that. So we're going to tighten this one down, about the same here. And then let's say this is at the end of the season, like I mentioned. You want to pull this whole thing off. We're just going to pop these 3 flange nuts. The carriage bolts will stay right in the track there. Just try to make sure that they're not falling out. You can adjust it here. I'm going to adjust my impact. I've got on a breakaway setting right now. Whoops. Didn't mean to take this one off. You'd leave this connector on. Sorry, I got distracted by that impact setting. So we're just going to pop that. This whole thing is going to come out like that. So whether you have a 10-foot pole in here, 20-foot pole, you're definitely not walking that. That's the other variance versus having our superior dock or a standard aluminum dock where you have a separate support. You're carrying it with that extra weight, but also you're going to have to get creative if you do have those longer poles. You may have to retract them all the way. That's how a lot of the guys doing those 24-footers through these are. They're just bottoming them right up to here. They float the sections out on our foam floats that we have here. We'll show you that as well. And then they're just adjusting. You'll see some dimple marks on the poles in the staining from about where you were. So you're not completely starting from scratch unless your water level's changing. But again, that's where having an old crappy dock or your neighbor's dock, if you can see the staining on their poles, even if it's the middle of winter time and lake's frozen, you can't get in to measure, it can still vary a lot neighbor to neighbor, but it's better than nothing. So you can see the height, the clearance height based on where that water staining is, based on where their brackets are for their support, and it makes it real simple. So again, if you're going to be doing this, stacking it for the winter, just get out a Sharpie and you just do, this will be the left side here. So I'm just going to label it up the top above this collar, 1L. That's simple. Do 1R on there. That way when you got a pile of poles, especially if they are all pretty similar, in this case we have like 8 and 10 and 12 different poles that are all the same length. So that way you know which sections in order, so those minute differences on height don't have to be readjusted in every section every year if you're not dealing with that muck or fluctuation. So again, it goes real easy. This whole thing right back in. Get a good view of that. So just leave these on. Don't take those off, waste of time. Both directions. And you can just pile these up nicely somewhere off to the side. Dropping that in. We'll flip this thing over for you. You got this one popping out of this little cheater track. Does end up very close to the location in some cases. So got that there. Just lining those three up. 3 flange nuts. Again, this is better than having on a superior dock or standard aluminum dock. You'd be putting it in, setting on your support, and going back. Putting your bolt, 2 washers, and a nut on there, usually just hand tight. You're going to be leveling the dock, keeping it straight because you do get some play in them, just in the brackets, and then going back through either as you're going in some cases, or some guys do it after the fact. I prefer as you go so it can't start snaking. And keep it all nice and tight together. But you're going to have to put all those nuts and bolts, you drop all the washers and the little tiny nuts, then go back and tighten them. So this is much faster. It just sounds worse. It is literally better. And again, each section just drops in there. And so more pole you can have through there. There's a 5-foot, for example. I'll show you a few ways we can do things once we get out here. I'm going to flip this over, walk this out on my own. But I do want to also show you these accessories before we get in the water. We do have our kayak attachment. You've got our Ultimate Dock bumpers. So these are specific. They do look just like our standard dock bumpers that slip over the poles with 2 clamps. This is actually meant for the Ultimate Dock track rail, the accessory rail that is integrated. Again, if you use none of these, you're still benefiting from that extra structure and rigidity in that profile or that extrusion. So these do have 4 other bolts on here. You can actually unbolt that flange, flip it horizontal if you wanted a horizontal bumper. You'll notice this bracket's offset. So if you're low to the water, or if you have something that sits a little bit taller, like a pontoon, sometimes you may have your rub rail hitting above the dock, depending on where your dock height is. So you'd have that bracket offset like this. You're extending up higher above it. If you're more in that range, then 12 inches is the absolute minimum clearance, and that's above the high water mark. So if you're flooding up and down a foot each year, then you need to technically be 2 feet, depending on where you are in that cycle. Because even if it's only a few weeks, you can get a lot of damage to a dock system from the waves and the twisting on it, whereas a wood dock, the only good thing about a wood dock is they do take a severe amount of abuse, and you're just going to blow out the corner of the wood with that bolt. Whereas on especially a traditional aluminum dock, the strongest part there is your bolt in the corner, and you could risk ripping it through your support. Generally, that's happening when people are tying a pontoon directly to it for permanent mooring for the season. You know, when you have a friend stopping over for the day, that's a little different. We do still have a lot of people auger a couple separate poles or use a mooring bracket with a couple poles and some bungees, but if it's a seasonal tie-up, we always do those 4 separate ones. So you can change that height. If your lake is busy, you got a lot of wake boats, anything up to 3 feet above it. We have some people on some real big water. They're getting 4-foot rollers. Some are 5 feet off the water. But because of these braces, you're very strong and stable, and you have that extra adjustment range, plus the option to pass that pole through. So it's huge compared to most of the options where you have these integrated supports and braces, but you're trapped to usually no more than 16 inches of adjustment at best. And that just flat out doesn't work for most people in those situations. So usually our average is probably about 18 inches above water. You've got a 4-inch dock rail that's going to put you 20 inches above for your surface height. So that's pretty normal. And that's what we try to shoot for, is kind of the minimum. Again, that's over the high water. So these would just hang on from the surface on this flange. You've got these 2 pinch bolts that go into this track to secure that on there. So that's half of a kayak system there. Got the bumper. And there are specific stairs for the Ultimate Dock as well that have that same flange. So that, I'll show you just picking this up. This is a 6-step model. It's the largest they do in this. We can do 4, 5, or 6. This has the optional second handrail. Comes with one. You can add that second. So this is heavier than most, being the top size plus the second handrail. I'll just show you here. Getting it stood up like that. Got one hand on it, so it's a little awkward getting it stood up. It's going to be far easier, obviously, with 2 people or 3. Then just control that coming down. But again, it's got that accessory rail, so you can move it without having to drill holes like standard stairs. So very nice. You get a little extra adjustment in the legs. Easy to put in with a couple people or even one with some floats. So again, we're kind of splitting the difference here. We're a little bit lighter, and it's about 140 pounds with 4-foot poles with the sockets and everything, and going to vary based on your pole length. We're using some of our float strips here to turn it on. If you're in grass, it's usually pretty harmless, but having it up off the ground a little bit, it's going to benefit, especially if you've got a couple sets of our float strips. I'll show you how easy it is to do it with those. You just want to gently rock this. Try not to put crazy pressure, especially if you have really long poles. You may need to carry it upside down with a couple people, probably float it upside down, or like I mentioned before, you could retract. If you have a super long pole, you retract it so your pad or your auger is right up here, have all that pole sticking above it, and just have a big bundle of floats and just adjust each one as you go. That way it's a lot easier to walk, especially going over a wall. So this would be pretty simple with these shorter ones. And again, just to show you that it can be done, because people don't can't conceptualize the numbers on the weights. So I'm going to do this one totally on my own. So just lifting it up. I've got our tools to measure here. Let's get these out of the way. I'm going to bring this out onto this float stack in the water, just to show you how we do it. Try to preset this. So these floats are how we do our boat lifts, basically giant noodles on steroids. We sell them in a set of 7. Pretty much all boat lifts take at least 14. So 2 sets is what we call it. A lot of them do take 3, which is 21. Sometimes even more if you have a giant hydraulic lift, or even just a hydraulic vertical cable lift, the hybrid style, especially if you got power screens or a huge canopy. It's all about the weight balance more than the total weight. A lot of lifts are going to float differently, even if they're all the same weight, just based on the exact setup. So it always helps if you shoot us a picture if you're not sure of how many you'll need, and we'll try to figure it out. But they're sold in that set of 7. So if If you have extras, you can use them for stuff like this. You're always going to benefit from that extra buoyancy. Even if you only need 18 instead of all 21, or 12 instead of all 14, you'll be able to use it somewhere. So we just bundle these with the ratchet. Makes it really easy to do the dock. This is far preferred versus some of the halves you may see on our site. That's basically for only dock use. If you're doing any lifts at all or helping a neighbor, strips are always the way to go. The only thing you can't do on them is really lay on it. Still could on this side, just a little more awkward. So some people do choose the halves, but forget it. If you're doing boat lifts with the halves, strips 100%, and you can still benefit on the dock. So we've got our bundle, got this ratchet strap tied in a loop here, so once I pop the dock off it, I can quick just loop it over the pole. Now when I'm ready for that boat lift, just gonna split this ratchet apart. So this is a 9x9 cube. These are 6'5" long. I'm a little over 6 foot, 6'1", so about 9 inches wide. Very buoyant. This will float me. If you want to take a quick peek a little bit. So you kind of surf those under, sink them under the lift, and you can pop your boat lift up without any lifting. And again, just get it right back here in your bundle. You can balance the lift. It's far safer than halves. A lot of benefits all around. So we're just going to link that back together. Just simple strap. Makes it easy to store, carry them. I'm going to preset this down here. Hopefully I can get it stay on a rock without floating away on me. Pop that ratchet in the water so I'm not risking gouging the dock at all. Stand this up. And again, this is just to show what can be done. It's always best with 2 or 3 people, but it's far easier than wood. But just showing you it can be done. I'm just going to balance this. I'm grabbing it right on this underside framework, getting it up on my shoulder. Be very careful on the steps here. All right. Just gonna go out. Trying to keep that off the customer's rocks. This one's actually going to get installed at this step over here, but just for the sake of easing the video, we're going to show you from this one. So, again, coming off steps or a bank, a lot of times we go over and into the yard. That way you can change your angle with some auger poles, short starter kit, or we do have a seawall bracket. If you have a steel seawall, you have that benefit there. Sorry. So into this heat. So anyway, got that. As you can see, it's done. Not recommended, but possible. Get that second person, going to be a lot easier. So on this shoreline, you can see as it's going in, we can change the angle to accommodate, and you can take a walk back to the house, especially if you get 2 or 3 sections in. You can check all that as you're going and make some minor adjustments just as you go. I'm going to use one of these floats for padding here, just so I'm not scratching up this rock for this demo, but this would be about the size or the height of a step. Like I said, about 8 or 10 inches, playing on 10 if you are going to do a short starter kit with the shorty leg sockets. Or other ways you could sleeve just a bare pole in there and make a spacer if you want it sitting flat on the ground with just a 4-inch step up. That depends on preference. If you're on these stone steps or a concrete wall, we never recommend to drill into the concrete. You're going to split it at some point with a pothole effect, getting water in there, but that'll give you a nice firm base to start and go from there. But that way, usually you'd be putting those in very last, make sure you're completely satisfied with the angle so you don't end up crooked just by a few degrees, amplified towards the end. You can try to go level. We try to keep them off the stone. So in this case, their intention is to install it 1 step down So be flush with the walkway because we do have sufficient clearance and very minimal seasonal fluctuation in this system on this lake. So it's going to be down, they're going to use a Trex type of board or a composite board to mount onto the step. They're going to find a way to secure that board, and then the dock is simply going to use what we call a seawall clip. Small piece of angle aluminum, very simple. It's just going to go through the side, and then that's going to secure to the board. That way they're not actually drilling their steps. It's going to be like a pressure fit and going to match the height of their other rock. So start there. Okay. So as we're going out, I'm going to move this a little further forward. So I can drag this just off the edge of this one. Okay. Not sure if I can drag that without it knocking the float back off. We'll see. So yep, depending on your height, again, for pretty much all boat lifts, you're going to have at least 14 of these. So this is 9. We could easily do a third row in here to get this extra height if we were matching this height above the wall. This is preferred most of the time, again, on that angle. It's always best to stay high and dry. That way, if the water does surge up, you don't have any bad surprises, any potential damage, or if there's a wake boat running around, maybe a little too close. You all know that happens and getting worse. So we're keeping them higher than ever. You know, it doesn't matter what your neighbor's done forever. It's what you should do compared to some of these that are way too low. So some get lucky, some get burned. It's just a matter of time. They'll probably all get burned being too low, unfortunately. So keep it up. Because of this, you've got all that structure. It's nice and stable, even if it's higher. The only difference really at that point is if you're floating a pontoon next to it, your height might be a little off when you're stepping in and out of the boat. But if you've got steps, so it's not an issue of kids climbing up and down or dogs, then really there's nothing bad about, you know, being 24 or 30 inches above the water. So again, 12 is the absolute minimum. You just kind of stack this accordingly. You want the floats about the height that you're going to be installing at. Makes it the simplest. Minimal lifting when you are leveling it. I'll grab this impact here and just show you how simple this would be. Because of those sockets, depending on your clearance, you may or may not be able to use an impact because that adjustment bolt is usually right around the height that most people are at. So depending on the waves, you might be using a wrench or a ratchet, but it's so simple to do that it's really still far easier than a traditional system. So I've got too many pockets here. I'm trying to find my 3/4 inch wrench. Whatever I did with that. Do have just my socket. Apologies. Not entirely sure where that went. Anyway, I'll just lift it up here and show you. But in this case, again, it comes with these caps and these bags. Just use a rubber mallet, dead blow, something soft, piece of wood if you have to. This is going to be the shore one without any poles in this case because it is going to drop down on a piece of composite board and be secured. So we can tap those in. If you ever need to tap those back out, instead of prying with a screwdriver or anything, that can chew them up. Just give them little taps from the inside and they pop out with your best chance to be able to reuse them without damaging any of the tabs on them. So always best to just pop those out from the bottom. Just gentle. So we can cap that one there. Put this here. Again, this customer's intention on their height is to have it nice, clean, flush, underdock style look with no pole showing at all. A lot of people will do that most of the way, and then on the platform, for example, they may stick them up higher for a friend stop by, throw a rope over it, throw solar lights on it, fishing pole, you know, if they pop the dock cap out. A lot of options. So I'm gonna just quick adjust this height here. Because right now I am basically at the water. So these are 4.5 inches thick typically. So almost everybody ends up with at least 3 rows of it. This one could have had that 4th layer on it for this height coming up, matching where I've got that other float. Again, just very simple. Get my level. In this case, it's not going to be level on this side, so I'll show you with that relativity on here. So we're going to start with one master edge. Doesn't matter which side, just make sure it's always that side. Again, always a 6-foot level. It's going to be a little more sensitive on the slight difference. And again, you can check that glare on the sections where they join up. So right at the water level. Again, just once you get a pitch change. And this is where having a second person would be very helpful. So they can watch that level for me. Simply doing this for the sake of showing you it can be done with less. It's just going to be that much easier and better. Here's my 3/4 that I was looking for. Handy in the lake there. So again, now we're going to come across. And if you were down here, you just make that adjustment. We always prefer impacts. Tell our guys, hold them gangster style. Put them upside down, that way you don't get surprised by waves. A lot of times I see people, especially novice stock installers or customers, sitting there staring at the level and they don't realize their battery is right down in the water. So, gangster style, upside down. So now we've got that pole disappearing. We're going to go level across. Right now it's tipping a little bit on that float on shore. Got slight variance. And I've got a little extra pole sticking through the pad. So a lot of times if you're hitting some rocks and you can't get that to go flush right in, it's easiest if you spin the pole. So I was doing that with my feet right here, kicking the foot pad side to side, wiggling that extra pole down into the sand, get us a nice little bite here. So again, starting with all that extra pull in there, the more reserve you can have without it being too high. So if you could have about 90% inside, that way you got a little bit of room. 80%, you have pretty much maximum upside without getting high-sided halfway down the dock. That's ideal. Tighten that. Got my pad put in. And just be careful with those foot pads on the corner. I am wearing my favorite boots from this brand called SEAC. Get these on Amazon, wherever on the internet. That's SEAC. They're 6 millimeters. I wear them in ice water, wear them in the middle of summer. If you've got your wetsuit, tuck it over the top. You can literally be in ice water just fine. They have a hard boot sole. Highly recommend it versus a soft dive booty. It just has a thin rubber sole. Again, I'm getting some water here. All right. So if we had a shore starter kit, we'd level that out and put those in last, but you do want to have it propped up basically at the height you're going to be installing as you go. Again, this one's going to drop down. It's actually going to have to get widened out with these rocks here slightly, or wood here. That side is a little wider. That's where it's actually going to get installed. Just with the stuff in the way, it's easier to film here. So that would be the last thing. Make sure you're happy with that angle, and then those would stay every year. The next section is just going to go on from there. This one would be a little bit higher here. And if you're going to be doing a lot of back and forth, we usually suggest to try to walk on the dock, get it shaking and shimmying. That way, if it's going to settle in a little bit, you can readjust it as you're going. If you got worse muck, sometimes you might have to do it 2 or 3 times. Sometimes it might be 2 weeks later, but sometimes maybe never. So it all depends. Same thing when you're setting an impact down. Pro tip, always put them on the side away. If you've got a container of your bolts, dock bolts, whether it's Superior, standard dock, or anything, we usually use a weighted can. It's not very fun if your little plastic tub catches wind and throws potentially 100 different bolts in the water that are not magnetic because they're all stainless. So tip these down, that way if you bump it, you're leveling it, you don't drop your impacts in. Many of our Makitas have taken a swim and they're all still ticking. So anyway, that, or if you got to just get a cheap one, nowadays they're so cheap, even if you are ruining them, it's literally worth it versus messing with ratchets in pretty much everyone's opinion. So you're gonna have a lot better time, especially making those fine adjustments. Again, you'd be stacking this to a different height, floating the next section out. The next section would simply drop into these connectors, and all it is 9/16 set bolt that will pinch them together. It's that simple. You can have that pole passing through. You're going to have all these options, very stable, very rigid with the bounce because of this track rail. You've got these extra accessories here. This bumper, I'll quick throw on here, and the kayak rack to show you that. So going back to our 9/16 socket here. And if we were doing a platform, then our connector clips would just be on the sides of the platform rather than on the end, and same with the two sockets. So you'd have your next two legs over here. This section would just drop onto that one, and therefore going out. That way you're not leveling all those sections all at once like you would be on a traditional dock. That's a lot of weight. There's usually no center leg unless you're doing like a 20 or 30 foot long platform by X number of sections wide. Then you might have to do some dipping in there for one of the inside corners once you start double stacking those. Probably makes no sense to most of you, but you'll know it if you're doing it. But otherwise, if you're using something with middle legs, it's miserable. You have to get up under there, use your back. You're lifting 500 pounds, maybe more, depending on how many sections, how many supports, getting those all squared, getting them all level, keeping pressure on that middle leg. Or if you got muck, then it's really miserable because you can only sink it so far, and you might get some bounce and clap if that one in the center starts losing a little pressure. Conversely, you can get high-sided on that one. If that pull is just a little bit too long, it's incredibly frustrating. So in this case, you're just dropping one onto the next. You can pass them through. If you are doing that double or triple deck going on the length, you'd have those in the middle, cut down and capped. And then some people line the whole perimeter with the outside poles. Some cut half them off or plan that length so they're flush. All depends on your preference. Our main concern is that you're safe height over the water, not tying a pontoon directly to it. So again, we're just going to put this bumper on. In this case, we're artificially higher over the water than where it's going to actually get installed. These just swing on. There's a little bit of a lip on there. Sometimes on the steps it can be a little of a jiggling game trying to get them both lined up. Sometimes you have to loosen these flange bolts when you're doing the step the first time just to get it so they're sitting totally square. It's a very tight tolerance in there on purpose, so that's going to have a nice tight hold. It just takes that little finesse sometimes on that first time. Or if the brackets are getting a little kicked each year. So that just goes on. Snug those up. Now you got our bumpers. Instead of a traditional dock where you have poles every 10 feet roughly, or usually if we're doing a superior platform or a standard aluminum dock, we always put a third support in the middle if you're going 12 feet wide, so 3 sections. We always do that third support. It's always going to benefit you even if you're only 2 sections wide. That does drive our quotes up a little higher than most, but we feel it's very beneficial. When you get all that space for weight and people, you're going to be getting a ton of weight out there, plus the weight of all the pieces. You're always going to benefit from having that extra in the middle. So we're very adamant on that. We always do that third support, whereas this, you're basically getting that on every single piece, plus integrated braces, plus not having to readjust your braces every time you readjust the dock height. Pull that whole thing out at once. They're all done. Truly think, in our opinion, this is the best dock on the market. Best blend of everything, every feature, and at a far better price than most of the competitors in this realm of these premium docks. So got that. Got kayak racks. We've got our system over there are mostly universal system mounted on a Superior next door, but this is the same type of nest we use here. It just has this ultimate dock flange with this shorty pipe welded on it. Levels, angles right on there. Back these off just a little more. Drop that right in. You'd have a pair of those per kayak. So very simple, very clean looking, very practical. So absolutely love this system. Again, truly think it's the best out there at any price. Especially with the platform, it's that much better. But even straight out, you're going to benefit from those extra braces, the rigidity of the track, the socket, the blend of everything. And as you saw, I just did that on my own, not doing that with wood dock in most cases, period. And then again, with a couple people, it's still going to be better. We know things are getting tough. Nobody wants to do this kind of work anymore. Companies that do install are having trouble in many areas, especially if you're in a remote area. We really encourage people to try on their own with their foam floats. Sometimes you may have the first time install done by professionals and then take over. Some cases they do it the first time because it's going to come down to your preference on how much pole is sticking above it. And that can be kind of hard to convey, especially if you're not there and trying to coordinate schedules. So a lot of times we'll suggest it that first time. You just saw how easy these sockets go together, how to adjust it, even if you've never touched a dock in your life. Not handy with tools, anything, very simple. So that way you can do it to your preference, get some pictures of it, get the measurements, label things. You could have somebody take over from there. Tons of great options. And that way you're never stuck high and dry. But even the best guys around, you know, when you have anywhere from 100 to sometimes 1,200 clients in the summer, somebody's got to be first and somebody's got to be last. So you're going to gain a lot more of your summer back. You know, save money in a couple of years after buying floats and some of our other install tools, our post ratchets, our boat lift crane. If you need that, you can use these easily for the jet ski lifts on the strips as well. Super handy to have, fun to play on, kids, everything. So got all this. Just the last thing I want to show you here. You see how that one did settle in a little bit, or it's a little bit off because of this side is still low, so we're not quite level. But I do want to show you how we measure for this system. So we're going to have a separate video on this as well. That we're going to split this off, but show you all at once here with the benefit of having this here. So with that knowledge in mind, that you want to be at least 12 inches off the water, ideally 16, 18, 20 inches. That's to the bottom of the dock. You've got a 4-inch side, just so we're on the same page. Usually we get a column, if you just draw us a little block sketch of the shape of the dock you want. You can add in what's your muck level. Again, are you at your ankles, your shins, your knees, your waist? You don't need to be jamming a tape measure in because you can't really, and a pole is going to give you something different than how far you're sinking. So it's kind of representative of a foot pad on the dock when you are measuring that. So we always get the muck depth, the water depth. If you have a seawall, we get the height of the wall and the depth of the water at the wall. That way we can at least tell the clearance from there. We understand sometimes in the middle of winter, that's the best you can do, especially if you bought the house in the middle of winter. But again, if you've got your neighbor's dock, an old dock came with the house, you can always look right over here. We've got this style system for this wood dock that it's replacing. It's a beautiful new option. You can see where some of the staining is, the darker. This one was set quite low on some of them. And depending on the lake, it's going to be much more obvious. And you'll see if the lake is fluctuating, generally you'll see where there's really heavy scum, but you'll also see where there's been some staining that might have later scum or no scum, but just a variance. And then you can measure, you know, to where that dock was sitting on there. So that gets us a starting point. Again, if you have a picture of that dock previously, whether it's right or wrong, most of the time they're wrong. You know, people have them 3 inches out of the water, 6 inches. There's a few behind here that are far too low, to be honest. Highly risky based on those waves and the twisting. Whereas the wood dock can take that abuse, and usually you have steel poles and augers with the wood dock, whereas we're always doing foot pads unless you're knee-deep muck or worse, or sometimes a little bit less, it may be beneficial to go to augers. But we generally try to avoid augering the dock entirely. So whenever we can, makes it that much simpler. Really no benefit of trying to pin down that dock. It may be better than nothing if you're going to tie right to it, but the simple answer is you shouldn't tie right to it for the season. Again, during the day is fine and friends are stopping over. It's incredibly windy today. You're probably not boating in this. As you can see, nobody is boating in this. So that's why it's different for the day tie-up versus seasonal. You're getting all these storms are kicking up worse and more often now. We've had a lot of docks and boat lifts, to be honest, that have all flipped in severe wind. You get the right wind, doesn't matter what you do. You might be talking to your insurance guy. So make sure you're covered there. Sometimes you are, sometimes you're not. Again, to get these measurements, we want that muck depth, the water depth, and your seawall height, or whatever height you plan to put it. You can tell us the seawall too. We just verify that you're going to be at safe point, and again, that's over the high water. So try to find out from your neighbors if you're new to the lake, where are we in that realm, or if you have their poles. This dock was actually just moved from a different lake, the one next door. So standing on those poles is not actually from here, but you can at least tell that even if you just drop one piece in without the dock, you'll see where it's at compared to where it has been in the past. That way we know, even if it's a couple weeks, we want to always keep it above that, just so you don't get any bad surprises. There's a lot of people that plan on that fall. They'll say to their dock guy, hey, put it 3 inches above the water. Dock guy should realistically say no, too risky. A lot of times they feel the pressure to do it, or a customer says do it anyway. Who knows what shouldn't be done. And in many cases, we've seen that instead of dropping right away, it'll keep surging up. Next thing they know, they're screaming at their guys to come back, readjust it, because now it's in the water or above it and either getting stained or twisted. So that's why we always do it. And you can certainly always go drop it. It's very simple. If it does truly drop, as soon as it does, you can always go drop it if you want to keep that 12 inches or 18 inches because of the height of your pontoon is floating next to it, or because of the kids or your steps or whatever. So always better to adjust it than to get burned. Even though half the guys that put them in too low, they just know, well, if it gets ruined, you talk to your insurance guy, they'll get to sell another dock system, get their commission again. We don't do that. We don't want to see that. That sucks for everybody, honestly. So a couple ways we can measure if you are going to be starting at that height, that artificial height. Let's say we have a step up. So that'd be more representative of if you had just a shallow beach with a very gentle start. A lot of times we have to gain that elevation artificially to get that safe clearance. So in many cases, we've actually had to have 2 or 3 foot legs with a set of 1 or 2 step stairs. We'd have to do those in our superior stairs generally, but just to walk up and on the dock so that we're getting that artificial elevation from a low bank. I always prefer the sea haul and that extra height. You're always safe, nice and level. There is some variance and some play available, so you can ramp it up slightly over a section or ramp down in some cases. After you're coming out level, then you can usually start ramping down if you need to drop a little bit. Sometimes that drives people nuts the way it looks. I like to keep it level personally. It's all preference, as long as you got that safe height. But what you can do if you're alone, you don't have to have the big 300-foot tape. We realize most of you don't have one of these laying around. Don't expect you to go buy one. Don't need one. Whether you got a rope, anything. The shovel, you don't need a bunch of helpers. It's easier with helpers, especially if somebody's writing down these numbers as you go. But in this case, I just have a simple roll of some string here. And what we did is we would just put some electrical tape every 10 feet. Makes it actually easier than trying to read a tape measure and trying to measure out every 10 feet, or 10.5 feet in this case on this Ultimate dock. 10'5" is what these are. And it's best if you're going to measure from your starting point. What I mean by that is this one is going to start actually down 1 step once it's actually over there in its final position, and it's going to be flush to the patio system here and on that board. But in many cases, if we're up and over the top, or you got to get that artificial height, you can do is jam your shovel in, or if you have a lot of that seasonal variance and you might have standing water 20 feet in your yard in some cases. We have a lot of customers that go 20 or 30 feet back into their lawn. We have some dock systems that are 300 feet over almost entirely dry ground in some marshier areas where parts of the year it's soggy, or all year it's soggy and they don't want to track mud all over the dock, so they actually start it back in that dry spot. So wherever that may be, most of the time, if we're doing a short starter kit, you end up with about 3 to 5 feet in the yard, depending. If you're going over a rock wall or behind a concrete wall, you're going to be more like 5 feet usually. So we're planning that length because sometimes that extra 5 feet may drastically change your poles if you hit a drop off, or in some cases, a lot of our customers may be in 7 or 8 feet of water on only the third section of dock. And again, we have some customers that are 400 feet out and they're barely thigh deep, barely able to use a boat lift at 400 feet. So 40 sections. So in this case, wherever we're starting, we're going to start back here. I just jam the shovel in. Right up here, we're going to put this, just so I don't pop any sprinkler lines or anything here. Not sure where they are, so I'm going to be on the side of caution. And you can just tie that string at whatever height your surface of your dock is going to be. So even if you're alone, you'll be able to visualize that height, get these several measurements all in one going out. Super simple, but you want to have that string basically at the level it's going to be at. You can try holding your level, but it's very simple, especially on a calm day. Water's level. You don't have to be truly level. It is kind of difficult messing around with the level on the string and then trying to get your other measurement. So you can just eyeball it off the water on a calm day. So obviously the water's level. So in this case, right now, for example, it's basically dry sand right at the rock wall, but the surface of our dock is at just over 26 inches here, which puts our clearance right at this particular spot at 22 inches, just to visualize. So that's very, very normal. Certain lakes, people think that's absurd. Other lakes, that's dangerously low. Sometimes, again, they're 4 feet off the water. It all depends on that knowledge of how much the seasonal fluctuation, how mucky is it going to be, how much wake boat traffic or yacht traffic. If you're in a bigger body of water, you could easily have a 4-foot wave periodically. Got a plan for that. So those are all the X factors beyond just the water. We always want a picture of your shoreline that helps. And again, a picture of the old dock, especially if you have it in. And even if it's a pile of parts on shore like this for the winter, we can still tell a ton from that. So the more you get us, the better it's going to be for everybody. And whether you're buying from us or watching from afar, that's going to be the case with any dock system from anybody. So hopefully you're learning anyway. So again, got this marked out. Got that shovel a little bit back, so my mark's a little bit off on this tape, just because I don't want to jam that in and pop any sprinkler lines or power. But otherwise, you could tie that to a block or something. What you want to do then is just hold that tight, hold it as close to level as you think. Let me grab this pole again here, just to help you visualize this. So again, some people literally want 5 feet of pole above the dock. We've had plenty of those. A lot of times that's for a handle next to a boat. Some people actually use cross arm clamps and a long pole, and they'll drill it and make a handrail down one side. There's a whole lot of options, and that's up to you. Again, we just care about the clearance. So in this case, if I had this one down flat, you could poke some through the pole, do that twisting and grinding, get a few inches, 3 to 5 inches usually, depending on the stone, into there. So in this case, we could visualize, like I said, several measurements at once. We're going to hold that about level, pretend the dock isn't there, but it's going to help you visualize it. So right now, you could tell us in your little block sketch that you send over. Doesn't have to be to scale, doesn't have to be a CAD drawing. Some of you will still send a CAD drawing, that's fine. But we are at roughly 38 inches to the surface. So that puts us just above a 3-foot pole. So again, I had a 2-footer on one side in here, a 3-footer on the other. That's just going to change the amount of reserve pole that we have down in here. We'll take a look at that in a second to show you what I mean by that without interfering. So if we wanted to cut these and cap them, we want as much in there as we can. But it's always better, especially the more vague your measurements are, or if it's the middle of winter and you truly can't go cut through the ice and measure every 10 feet and have nothing to measure, you don't have a dock, the neighbor doesn't have a dock, any starting point. If you can drill one hole at the end, that helps, you know, an ice auger hole, measure down there. But the grade can be wildly different between here and there. Sometimes it's very steady and then plummets over a cliff. Sometimes it actually gets shallower the further you go. So best to get in there. Floating in a kayak, poking a pole down might be better than absolutely nothing, but still not very, very true. So if you know there's a lot of muck, we're going to just keep adding a little more safety factor. Even if you end up with $100 or $200 of, you know, some scrap tube that you cut off, it's almost always cheaper than having dock guys come back twice or having to drive in and swap everything and get your helpers back out there and do all that. So when in doubt, a little bit extra almost always pays off. So not just trying to upsell it, it truly ends up better and cheaper in most cases. So one way or another. And again, you're just gonna have more of that, especially if you're augering. Sometimes you don't know till you know. So even your best guesses and best intel can still be off. Sometimes you can have a lily pad root base or some other root base that's artificially holding you up. You might think you're only sinking to your ankles. We have that a couple times a year. And then all of a sudden, once you punch through that, it can be literally bottomless muck. So it helps talking to people. But again, your neighbors are probably doing some things wrong. So just because they've done it doesn't mean you should keep doing it. Our goal is to make sure it's right and safe and best for everybody. So again, that surface height is 36 inches. We've got our 5-foot pole here. So I've got 5 foot up by my hand. I've got this twisted a little bit into the ground just to show you. But we're measuring now, we've got that clearance. We've got 9 inches of water, nice sandy ground. So you could put next to your little sketch. You got firm ground or zero muck, 9 inches water, and then surface height you can mark as 36. And then you could tell us the length of the pole you want. So if you wanted to have that 5 foot above, you could say, well, surface is at 36 and I still want a 10-foot pole or 8-foot pole in that case, just depending on how much you're planning on poking through, how much your muck is. So you get all those measurements all at once. And that's very helpful having those all listed out versus just a water depth or just a pole length, because then we're not sure whether you're safe height, if you're going to be an inch above the water or way too high or not factoring the muck properly or one of those other things. So that way too, you can, if you pretend this dock system isn't here, you could see, okay, that is how an 8-foot pole is going to look up here. Does that look completely outrageous and am I going to hate that, or is that going to be a great height for a handle, or do I need to actually go higher? You tell all those things that otherwise, without the string method, without getting in here, simply measuring the water is going to be off, and simply measuring at the start and at the end, you're going to be potentially off depending on that grade variance as you go out. So it truly is best every 10 feet, or in this case 10.5 feet from your true starting point, whether you're 3 feet in the yard, 5 feet, 20 feet, 100 feet, start from there, go out, hold that string level, just keep going. And again, if you're gonna be going out further, you're running out of string, or if you're just trying to line this thing up for the first time, just take your shovel with you, somehow mark where you were. Now, let's say we're at 20 feet, somewhere around here. You could just poke that in, tie the string at your same height. Just gonna pop that up. Right now I've got it kind of loose. I'd cinch that knot up a little bit, just so it'll stay at that height. Come out level. Again, measure that muck depth, because it does usually change. Measure that muck depth, the water depth, and then the surface height. And then you can tell us beyond that, or if you're not sure, you can just give us those and we'd put the closest pole per our normal formula. Again, most people end up wanting about, let's see, got 12 inches right there of pole above it. up to probably 18, about there. It's probably our average. Generally speaking, if we're just getting a sandy start, we're going to start with at least 3 foot of pole above whatever the water depth is. If you're coming off of an elevated wall, our general formula is to start with at least 4 feet longer of a pole than what your water depth is, if that's just very minimal info. But the more you get, the better it's going to be for everybody, and the happier end result with less cutting or changing and leapfrogging these around. So get that. You can just keep measuring out, end up where you want, and again, try to go square to where you want it to actually end up. So if you got to have your friend or family up at the house watching, in this case, if we wanted to actually go over here, it's a little more square to the dock versus where I have it. I put my shovel a little tighter in there, but there can be a big variance side to side on your own lot. Sometimes you might be in an old boat motor hole, freshwater spring, or depending on the shape of your ground or your lake bed, your shorefront, sometimes it'll put you over the cliff on one side of your property versus over here might be too shallow for your boat lift. Also telling us the intentions that you have for that dock system. If you just want something to kayak or swim off of, that's great. That helps us. If your plan is to have a boat lift out there and you're telling us you only have 2 feet of water at the end, that's not going to work. So as you're doing that, general rule of thumb for a pontoon is try to have at least 3 feet of depth for a pontoon lift. Tri-toon, it's going to vary depending on the boat and many other factors, and that's at the low water mark at that point. So if you have 5 feet in the spring, but it drops to 2 feet in the fall, that's a problem. Will be a problem. So it's opposite of the dock. We want to measure the dock off the high water. We're planning for the high water, and the lift, plan for the low water. But if you have that big variance, we'll still need to know that because you might need longer legs in your boat lift. But again, go to where you want to be, just measure out and down, square that up, and then as you are installing it, like I said, you could take a shovel or a pole out there, put it where you did want to end up. That way you can kind of aim the side of that dock down it. So it's going to be square going down. That way you have less side to side. And then the very final thing you do once you're happy with all that would be come and either auger your poles or secure to your board if you're using the seawall clips, setting on a board or on a step. We don't like going right on the rock so you don't hear that screeching and grinding. So if you put a composite board or something under it, at least you don't have that. But it can be better if you can somehow secure it without trying to crack your seawall, especially if you have a concrete wall. So those are all the benefits of the Ultimate Dock system. Again, this is Lifts, Ladders, and Docks in Schoolcraft, Michigan, just south of Kalamazoo. Ultimate Dock, we've got Superior Dock, a lot of options, a lot of other videos on our channel. Check them out, subscribe. That helps us, it helps you. Hopefully you learned something today, whether you're buying the stock system or looking or in our range. Hopefully some of these tricks will apply to all your systems. And check us out. We've got our foam floats on our website. We've got a bunch of videos on those on our channel. And a lot of options. Love to hear from you. Hope you have a great day. Thank you.